Whether you're trying to construct steam passenger trains or diesel passenger trains, the problems are the same. How do we make it varied? Well, this is how we got on at Chadwick. Hi, welcome to Chadwick Model Railway. I'm Charlie. Now, a couple of weeks ago I produced a video on how to sort of build realistic mixed freight trains, and to be perfectly honest, it was well received. But I had a great deal of comments coming in saying, can you do the same with coaches? No pressure there then. Coaches are very difficult really to build into interesting trains because all coaches will sort of look the same. It's not like a freight train where you can build in a couple of vans, a couple of tankers, a couple of gunpowder wagons and all that sort of thing and give it a nice varied look. Otherwise you end up with, you know, sort of 5 foot of tankers and they're all the same, bar the weathering, let's say, or an EWS hopper train, that they're all identical. So how can you improve the look of your coaching stock? By adding in variation. Now at this stage I'd like to thank Dick from the West Couplings Model Railway Society, because Dick has provided me with loads of coaches here that I don't have, because I model from 1968ish to 1973. But Dick has a much more wider range of interest, let's say. He's got a great deal of stuff. Anyway, so what I want to do is lead you through the thought process. Now, one thing about coaches is the fact that they have these strange abbreviations such as TSO and CK and all the rest of it. And in the Show More tab down below, you'll find a link to a Wikipedia page which explains all the meanings of all these abbreviations. So without further ado, let's take a look at those. Now this is an old Mark 1 BR coach made by Triang, and as you can see, it's a blood and custard coach. I've taken out the 2 screws, which means it's about to fall apart. And if I just take off the roof, never as easy as you think, is it? And the sides will just pop out and we're left with the guts of it. And as you can see, there's the seating arrangement, and on the other side there is an access corridor. If we look at the panel of the coach, we can see that there is a 1 on this door and a 1 on this door, but not on this door, which means that this is first class accommodation and that is standard, or as you used to call it, second class accommodation. Now, because there are 2 classes of accommodation, it's known as a composite coach. Remember the C for composite. Whereas here, there is a corridor. And as opposed to using C for corridor, we'll use K. I told you it wouldn't be easy, would it? So it's K for, if it's a corridor coach, there is a K involved. And if there's mixed accommodation, then there is a C for composite. This is really flying along, isn't it? So what is the physical difference then between the first class and second class accommodation? Well, allegedly first class is more comfortable. You probably get more springs underneath your bottom and nice clean headrests. It's 3 per seat in first class, whereas it's 4. So there's a maximum of 6 in first class and 8 in second class. So you get a little bit more room and a little bit more comfort. Well, you get what you pay for, don't you? So there we are. Let's put this back together and have a look at some other variations. Now, this little beauty is a Thompson brake composite. And as you can see there on the left-hand side is the accommodation for the guard. And obviously within the coach, you'd have a manual braking system. Next, towards the centre, there's a door with a 1 on it, which obviously marks up the first class accommodation, and the door at the other end doesn't have a 1 on it, so that must be second or perhaps standard class accommodation. What you can't really see is there's also a corridor on one side, which obviously links the accommodation together and also access through to the guard. So it's a brake composite corridor, therefore it's a BCK. Now I'm not going to spend much more time on these abbreviations, but as I said, it's all down in the Show More tab with a link to the Wikipedia explanations. Now it's also worth talking about braking systems, because up until the Mark II coach, it changed that the Mark IIA did change to air brakes, but everything from the Mark II coach and earlier is vacuum braked. Obviously, in the days of these coaches zooming around, then they were all steam hauled, and naturally they would be vacuum braked. But it's worth mentioning that's exactly what happened. Now, on the 1st of January 1948, British Railways was born, when all the big four were amalgamated, and British Railways that fell out, basically, wasn't it? And from then on, they decided to come up with a corporate colour scheme, and obviously blood and custard or caramel and cream or whatever variation people like to use on it, because the colours did vary somewhat as well. But that was the colour scheme then from 1948, and I think it was until 1956 that British Railways tried to get them to use this corporate colour scheme. Now here are 7 different coaches, so let's take a look at these and see how you might choose to build these into a decent rake for yourself. Now you've already seen the Thompson brake composite, so we'll move on to the rest of the train, and here we have an unmistakable look of an XLMS 57-foot stannier with all those narrow windows. Quite an unmistakable coach, really. You can't really get that one mixed up with a great deal of others. Next we have a remarkable looking vehicle, and this is the XGWR Hawksworth, and I really do think this is a beautiful coach. Moving on again, staying with the GWR, we have the Collet, again XGWR, and moving on again, another quite remarkable looking coach is an ex-Southern Region Mansell coach. Back to the GWR, and we have a Centenary, and then finally an ex-Southern Region Bullied. Now, as you can see, there's a great variety, and you can mix and match a lot of these coaches together to give you a varied feel, and also the colour matches aren't perfect, so that adds to the interest of the train. Of course, not forgetting that you could do with a buffet car poked in there as well. But a remarkable set of coaches, and will lead to very interesting train construction. Now in 1956, British Railways decide to review their crest, and they change from the one we know as the early crest into the one we know as the late crest. This was also a key date because areas were once more given regional autonomy in that their key exclusive trains could revert back to some of their earlier colour schemes. The general policy was to move away from carmine and cream and adopt a crimson shade, very similar to that used by the London Midland Scottish Railway. The Western region, however, returned some of its coaches that were used on named express trains to chocolate and cream, similar to that used by the GWR before nationalisation, and from July 1956 the Southern region began using a coaching stock green that was somewhat darker than the malachite green colour of the old Southern Railway. Now obviously for reasons of cost all this repainting couldn't be done overnight, which gives us another asset to our modelling abilities. We can now mix and match the sort of blood and custard type arrangements with chocolate and cream or crimson, or on the Southern region the green. So let's take a look at those. Now here's an image taken in Plymouth, and it shows the carriage sidings that lead down to Mill Bay docks, and I believe that these sidings have long since disappeared. But on those carriage sidings you can see there's a real mix-up of colours, most of them being either chocolate and cream or crimson. And just for good measure there's also a green one thrown in there too. So it shows that you can build up your coaching stock in a variety of colours. I thought I'd use Warship Rapid, supporting a crimson colour scheme with full yellow ends. It's a vacuum only fitted loco and ideally suited to pulling a rake of Mark 1s. So as we send off our little maroon warship, what's it actually hauling? Well, the first coach is a maroon brake second corridor. Behind that is a green restaurant car, and I can't really be more accurate than that. And then we have a composite corridor, which is CK, then a gangwayed full brake known as a BG, and finally a restaurant miniature buffet, an RMB. And now coming across the viaduct, they do in fact look rather splendid. Now clearly those 5 coaches being pulled by that warship is not necessarily any stretch of the imagination a realistic train. For starters there's a full brake, and then there's a brake second on there and 2 restaurants. There's clearly no room for passengers. But what I'm trying to show you is that there is a variety of colour schemes which you can bring into your layout. But talking of your layout, of course, there are 2 factors which will put constraints on what you can actually do. The first thing is, of course, the size of your layout, because if you've got a monstrous layout and you can afford to have a train length of say 8 coaches, I mean of course you can go longer, but I kind of feel that 8 is enough in some ways, because you end up with monstrous trains, monstrous platforms and infrastructure to suit. So keeping it down to 8 coaches sort of works for me. On these platforms here that I'm going to build, I'm only going to have 6 coach platforms, so you've got a loco plus 6, and it will kind of work. But of course for your layout it's again the size of the layout, but also the type of trains you want to run, because if you're going to depict a branch line, and whether it's a pannier type loco with 3 coaches, or say a high mech with 3 or 4 coaches, or 3 coaches and a siphon G and that kind of thing, then you build it to your layout. But it is worth mentioning that if let's say you're going to have 3 coaches, you might choose to have a brake second, a second class, and a composite. So you've got first and second class, and second class with brake. So you've got the variety then of 3 different coaches with 3 different uses in a small train. And of course, if you were to have, let's say, two crimson coaches and a blood and custard, it would work if that's the right era for your loco. So it does bring you in lots of flexibility, and almost every conceivable coach that's, that was built has been modelled. I mean, the types are out there by the thousand, and of course you don't have to buy new coaches are extremely expensive. I try to shy away from them. I do tend towards eBay or swap meets. I went to one the other day at Shepton Mallet Showground and bought a nice little crimson full brake for, I must confess, it was under £10, and with LEM couplings. The bargains are out there if you want to search for them.
That's right, yeah. And then take them back down to this narrow here.
One of our club members has this long train which he takes along to the club. His own layout isn't big enough to support it, but at least there we can run big trains. Now, the next major change in coach technology was the introduction of the Mark II coach, steam heated, vacuum braked on B4 bogies, if you're into that kind of thing. But the colour scheme that they left the factory was quite interesting, because they were outshopped in maroon, except for the ones that went to the southern region, which were green. Now, you can look on the marketplace in eBay, etc., and these things are very difficult to find. Fortunately, Jeff from our club had in his possession a Mark II southern green one, and as you can see here, it's not the best model in the world, made by Lima, but it does make a statement in time, as it were, that these things did exist. Suddenly, it all went blue. Now, you've met Warship Rapid before, but in a supporting role today is Warship Kelly. But the truth be, there is no motor in this one, it's just there for the eye candy. And bringing up the rear, we have one first class, a kitchen restaurant, 3 second class, and a full brake. And to be perfectly honest, the train then hangs together very well and looks sufficiently long to give it some form of realism. Now, it was the 1st of January 1965 when BR Blue corporate livery was introduced across the fleet. And British Railways became British Rail, another monstrous step forward. And actually the Class 50 was introduced in 1967, I believe, in corporate blue, one of the first sort of leaders in that field. But let's go back to coaching stock and the Mark II fleet. So here we have two models from Bachmann, and one is a Mark II, which is on the left, and the other is a Mark IIA, which is on the right. But what's the real difference? Well, in reality, the Mark IIA was a great leap forward because it was air braked, and it also had folding vestibule doors and had which were green in colour. But apart from that, they are pretty much identical. Now turning to the underside of these wagons, hopefully you can see that there are two vacuum reservoirs on the underside of the Mark II, whereas if I switch to the Mark IIA, Bachmann have obviously done their homework and the vacuum reservoirs have gone and the air braking system is installed instead. And then looking at the back doors there, you can see the green folding vestibule doors. So in some kind of summary then, the Mark II coaches stood apart because they had vacuum braked, but also they could be hauled by Hymex and warships. From the Mark IIAs onwards, they all have air brakes. The Mark IIBs had internal closing doors and pressure heating and ventilation. Also wraparound doors, and they were slightly longer. But it was only when you got to the 2Ds and onwards that you had the full air conditioning, and these were a great step forward, really were sort of top dollar coaching stock. And of course we can now see the Intercity logo as appeared on the side. So the next question is, can we make an interesting train out of more modern rolling stock? Well, here we see one of my Class 50s putting a train up the helix. So let's slow it down and see what I've built it from. Now we have to employ a little bit of poetic license here, because this is an air braked train. It's made up, as far as I'm concerned, of Mark IIAs. And when the Govs originally came out, they were vacuum braked, but in the fullness of time, of course, they were changed to air brakes to suit modern rolling stock. I then have a couple of first class coaches and then a restaurant car. Now clearly this restaurant car should actually have a kitchen with it, but I don't own one of those as yet, but I'm sure it will come along. But as you can see, it's a Mark I. Now, for the Mark II fleet, no new buffet cars, restaurant cars or full brakes were manufactured. So every time you see a train that comprises of Mark II coaches, then it'll always have a Mark I type buffet or full brake, which when you compare to the nice, rather sexy looking 2Ds, E's and F's with their air conditioning, they do look somewhat antiquated. And then working the way down the rest of the train, it's pretty straightforward really. There is a few standard class accommodation, and at the back end there is a brake second. If I bring up that image once more of the Class 50 pulling those late Mark II coaches with air conditioning, clearly you can see the buffet car Mark I is the second coach in, but if you look right to the far end, you can see a Mark I full brake on there as well. And it's because that British Rail didn't build those facilities into the Mark II fleet that some other interesting rolling stock has reappeared. And here you can see a Gresley buffet car converted to air brakes or perhaps through braked and into blue-grey livery. And that's a marvellous little asset to have on your layout should you be able to get your hands on one of those. Of course, adding parcel vans and siphon Gs to your train does make it a bit more varied, but of course you can take it a stage further, which I will do in due course. And I've got a couple of these Oxford motor rail wagons, which I will obviously fill with cars and pop in to one of my trains off on its holidays to Cornwall. So it gives us much more variety to bring to a layout. Now, I've got to thank members of the West Camel Model Railway Society, namely Steve, Jeff and Ian, because they all supplied me the odd bits and bobs, coach and train, that sort of thing. But my main thanks goes to Dick Smith, because Dick has supplied me with 10 or 15 coaches and a lot of the background information that goes with it. So Dick, thank you very much, and I'm sure the audience will appreciate your generosity. Well, I do hope you found that interesting. It was certainly a challenge doing the research and shooting it. And then hopefully in the fullness of time, when I've built my trains up, we can come back to this and look at the varied arrangements that I hope to build into my fleet. Anyway, in the meantime, I'd like to thank the patrons who support the channel, make it all possible. And of course, if you're not a subscriber, there's the button. Don't forget to give me a thumbs up if you enjoyed the video. And there should be a video here and here. And I'll see you in 2 weeks' time. Thanks a lot. Take care. Bye-bye.